So, Alex, so let me ask you. You started off as a writer, wrote one of my favorite books, The Beach.
Thank you.
Then you went and started some screenwriting with 28 Days Later, and now you're getting to Judge Dredd. I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about that evolution.
It's just like the way it worked out.
Sure.
I do know that people kind of differentiate between novel writing and screenwriting.
Yeah.
I don't. I think they're basically the same. I mean, one ends up being very collaborative and the other essentially isn't. But apart from that, the compulsions are absolutely identical. And you begin in the same place, which is a blank page and all that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
You've got to come up with characters and themes and why the characters are doing what they're doing and why you're obsessed with telling this particular story. It's the same deal, really.
I'm sure you had an awareness of the character before getting onto Judge Dredd, but was it something that you had grown up with?
Yeah. I started reading Dredd when I was about 10.
2000 AD, right?
Yeah. British comics historically were weekly, and they were anthology. So there might be 7 or 8 different stories in each one. And 2000 AD has sort of precursors to an extent. There was a comic called Eagle with a guy called Dan Dare. But really, 2000 AD just came out of nowhere. And if you were 10 years old in 1980 or 1979 and this thing arrived, it was mind-blowing.
Dark, kind of like punk rock of comics, right? A little bit?
I think you could easily make a case to say that punk and 2000 AD are related because Dredd is, apart from the fact that there's a lot of aggression within it, it's basically subversive. It's taking the piss.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's got a punk sensibility within it. I liked it. I was completely captivated, really, from the first moment I saw it, and it stayed that way. And there's another interesting thing that they did with Dredd, which is he ages in real time.
He's in his 60s, right? Yeah.
Precisely. But it does something strange to the experience of reading a character. If, you know, I'm 42 now, and I started reading him when I was 10. So you kind of grow up with this guy.
This Dredd is totally different than the other Judge Dredd, of course, the Stallone version. It probably in the same way that Batman Begins is different from Joel Schumacher's Batman movies, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I wanted to know, how important was it for you to get some of the social commentary that was in the original 2000 ADs, which were kind of, I guess, a reaction to Thatcher-era England back into the film, which could be taken as a reaction to what's going on now?
Yeah, sure. The approach I took to Dredd specifically with regard to that was that it was implicit, that the satire was implicit. If you have a fascist state, the hero is a fascist cop. There's a built-in satire in that. You don't really need to do anything else. But if we ever got a chance to develop this character further, there's a lot you could do to further explore that. I think one of the most interesting ideas in Dredd, I mean, he's an anti-hero.
Yeah.
But there's a really great storyline built into it, which is that you get these pro-democracy terrorists, and they're terrorists. They're not messing around. They'll kill people. They'll blow stuff up, and they're terrorists as you and I know them, as it were. But they're pro-democracy, and the guy who's trying to stop them is Dredd. And that now.
Who's the hero? Who's the villain?
Yeah, you don't need to satirize that, do you? It's all embedded within that idea. So I think I tried to take the approach of just having total confidence in what was already built into the story and not really signpost it in the way that you could with this kind of thing.
I mean, and while it works as a genre film, also, you know, you've got the action, you've got the 3D, you've got all that, but also it kind of doesn't underestimate the audience at all, right? It kind of assumes that the audience is, you know, quick enough to, is you know, invested enough in the story to kind of go for something like that, you know, the gray area a little bit.
I hope it's got something kind of subversive in it as well. I mean, at the heart of this film is a drug.
Yeah.
And the message about that drug is complicated. It's not really a just say no to this drug film. The drug itself is captivating, kind of enticing. It's overtly beautiful. I read someone saying at some point, what's so bad about this drug? Why is Dredd trying to stop people from taking it? And the drug is presented really as an escape from a really terrible world in which these people live. And you might say, not surprised they want an escape. Who wouldn't from a place like that? And that's using the drug a bit like Dredd as an anti-hero.
Yeah.
Like, what position is the film taking on that drug? What position is the film taking on Dredd?
Dredd, to be faithful to the comics, keeping his mask on for most of the movie, and having somebody like Karl Urban, who's great, but it's a different kind of vibe than Stallone, I guess, who kind of,
Sure.
I think was such an icon at the time, they kind of overpowered the role and it became almost a spoof of itself.
Well, you knew what he looked like under the helmet
Yeah.
anyway, didn't you? I mean, the thing about the helmet was none of us ever really considered taking it off.
Sure.
If you grew up reading that comic, his helmet's always been on. It's just like a given. It never seemed very complicated. That aside, Karl,
Yeah.
if we'd said take the helmet off, would have just gone, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So that would have been the end of that conversation. And Karl aside, the guys who licensed the rights to us put in the contract he can't take his helmet.
Oh, really?
So there was like an
Protecting
enormous
his character, yeah.
tsunami of pressure,
Sure.
which I would have been part of, saying keep the helmet on. It does create a problem, I suspect, at a certain point. If you keep telling this story, do you reach a point where you're thinking, why don't you just take your helmet off?
Sure. But it's a contained story, though.
I think that's the trick, is you never
Yeah.
put the guy in a position where the helmet should be off. If he's in the bath, you'll be thinking, why are you wearing that helmet? But if he's in a gunfight, you're thinking, smart move. So.